Ladies and gentlemen, we gather here not to speak of trivial magic, nor the cheap tricks of the mind that promise riches without sacrifice. No, we speak of something far deeper, far older. The law of attraction is not a modern invention. It is the ancient dialogue between the human soul and the cosmos. You see, the psyche does not merely observe reality, it participates in its creation. Every thought, every image held in the mind's eye sends ripples into the collective unconscious. And from those depths, the universe answers in symbols, in dreams, in the strange choreography of synchronicity. The psyche is not a passive receptacle, a mere mirror reflecting the external world in obedient submission. It is rather a living, dynamic force, an active participant in the shaping of reality itself. This is a truth that modern materialism often forgets, but one that the ancients knew well, and that depth psychology, particularly the work of Carl Jung, has resurrected in our time. The psyche does not simply observe, it creates. It does not merely record, it interprets, distorts, magnifies, and transforms. Every thought, every image held in the mind's eye is not an inert impression, but a seed planted in the fertile soil of the unconscious, where it grows, mutates, and eventually bears fruit in the outer world. This is the essence of the psyche as a creative force, an idea that bridges the mystical and the psychological, the subjective and the objective, the seen and the unseen. When we speak of the psyche's creative power, we are speaking of something far deeper than conscious intention. The conscious mind, for all its brilliance, is but the tip of the iceberg. Beneath it lies the vast and uncharted territory of the unconscious, a realm where logic dissolves and symbols reign. Here, in these depths, the raw materials of our reality are forged. Dreams, fantasies, sudden intuitions, and inexplicable compulsions all arise from this hidden workshop of the soul. They are not random, they are the language of the unconscious, speaking in metaphors that often elude the grasp of linear thought. To understand the psyche as a creative force is to recognize that these subterranean currents are not mere disturbances in the mental apparatus. They are the architects of our lived experience. Consider the phenomenon of projection. We do not see the world as it is. We see it as we are. Our unresolved fears, our unacknowledged desires, our repressed wounds, all of these color our perception, casting shadows or lending brilliance where none objectively exists. A man who fears betrayal will find evidence of it everywhere, not because the world is conspiring against him, but because his psyche is shaping his reality to confirm his deepest, often unconscious beliefs. This is not illusion in the dismissive sense. It is creation in the most literal sense. The psyche, through its projections, constructs the world it expects to see. And in doing so, it often brings that world into being, for our actions are inevitably guided by our perceptions. The paranoid man, expecting betrayal, behaves in ways that provoke it. The woman who believes herself unworthy of love unconsciously pushes it away. The psyche's creations become self-fulfilling prophecies, not by some mystical decree, but by the inexorable logic of psychological causality. But the creative power of the psyche extends beyond mere perception. It manifests most vividly in the realm of symbols and archetypes. Jung discovered that the unconscious does not deal in abstractions or sterile concepts. It speaks in images, powerful, numinous, and often universal. These archetypes, the hero, the shadow, the anima, the wise old man, are not just metaphors. They are living forces within the psyche, patterns of energy that shape our thoughts, our emotions, and ultimately our destiny. When a man is gripped by the hero archetype, he does not merely think about bravery. He is compelled to act heroically, often in ways that defy rational self-interest. When the shadow erupts into consciousness, it does not whisper. It overwhelms, dragging repressed aspects of the self into the light with terrifying force. These archetypes are not passive templates. They are dynamic, creative energies that mold both inner experience and outer reality. This brings us to the crucial point. The psyche does not distinguish between inner and outer in the way the conscious mind does. In the depths of the unconscious, the boundary between self and world is porous, fluid. This is why active imagination, a technique Jung developed to engage directly with the unconscious can feel so startlingly real. The figures that emerge in these dialogues are not mere fantasies. They are autonomous, with their own wills, their own intelligence. They resist, they argue, they reveal truths the conscious mind could never concoct. To the rationalist, this is madness. To the depth psychologist, it is evidence of the psyche's creative potency. The unconscious does not recognize the ego's artificial divisions. It flows unimpeded, shaping both internal imagery and external circumstance with equal ease. And what of synchronicity? Those uncanny moments when an inner thought or emotion is mirrored by an outer event, when a dream of a lost friend precedes their unexpected letter, when a sudden insight coincides with a chance encounter that confirms it. Jung called these meaningful coincidences, but they are more than that. They are the psyche's fingerprints on the fabric of reality, proof that the creative force within is not confined to the skull, but extends into the world. The rational mind dismisses these as chance, but the deeper mind, the psyche, knows better. It recognizes these moments as the natural consequence of its own creative power, the outer world responding to the inner in ways that defy conventional causality. This is not to say that the psyche is omnipotent, that mere wishing can bend the laws of physics to our will. The creative power of the psyche is not a superhero's fantasy. It is a subtle, often slow, alchemical process. It works through symbols, through emotions, through the slow crystallization of unconscious patterns into conscious reality. A man who wishes to change his life must first change his psyche, for the outer world is but a reflection of the inner. This is why affirmations alone so often fail. They are spoken by the conscious mind, but if the unconscious does not believe them, it will sabotage their realization at every turn. True creation begins not with force, but with dialogue. The ego must listen to the unconscious, must engage with its symbols, must integrate its shadow. Only then can the psyche's creative power be harnessed consciously, rather than acting autonomously in ways that may contradict our conscious desire. The implications of this are profound. If the psyche is truly a creative force, then our reality is not fixed, not predetermined, but malleable, not by brute force of will, but by the deeper, slower work of psychological integration. To change one's life, one must first change oneself, not superficially, not through mere positive thinking, but through the hard, often painful work of confronting the unconscious, of bringing its contents into the light where they can be transformed. This is the alchemy of the soul, the true meaning of manifestation. It is not about forcing the universe to obey our whims, but about aligning ourselves, consciously and unconsciously, with the reality we wish to inhabit. The psyche, then, is not a passive observer, but an active creator. It is the loom on which the tapestry of our reality is woven, thread by thread, symbol by symbol, dream by dream. To ignore this is to live as a leaf tossed by the wind, at the mercy of forces we refuse to understand. But to recognize it, to engage with the psyche as the creative force it truly is to step into the role of co-creator, to participate consciously in the unfolding of our own destiny. This is the great work, the only work that matters. For in the end, we do not find the lives we want, we create them from the inside out. The modern mind is trained to perceive reality through the lens of linear causality, a rigid sequence where cause precedes effect in an unbroken chain, where every event is the inevitable result of prior conditions, predictable if only we knew enough variables. This mechanistic worldview, inherited from Newtonian physics and Cartesian logic, dominates our understanding of existence. But it fails to account for those moments when life fractures the illusion of order, when a dream foretells an unexpected encounter, when a thought is echoed by a stranger's words, when a decision made on a whim unravels into a revelation that feels fated. These are not mere coincidences. They are glimpses of a deeper pattern, one that operates not in straight lines but in resonances, in symmetries, in the invisible threads that connect the inner world of the psyche with the outer theater of events. This is synchronicity, a concept introduced by Carl Jung to describe meaningful coincidences that defy conventional causality, revealing instead a universe where psyche and matter are not separate domains, but intertwined dimensions of a unified reality. Synchronicity challenges the bedrock assumption of materialism, that the mind is an epiphenomenon, a byproduct of the brain's electrochemical processes, with no agency beyond the skull. Jung proposed the opposite, that the psyche is a fundamental aspect of existence, capable of influencing and being influenced by the physical world in ways that transcend linear cause and effect. The implications are radical. If a thought, an emotion, or a symbolic image can coincide with an external event in a way that carries meaning, then the psyche is not locked inside the head, but extends into the fabric of reality itself. This is not mysticism in the derogatory sense. It is an observation of how consciousness interacts with the world when we move beyond the narrow confines of mechanistic thinking. Consider the classic example Jung recounted of a patient who dreamed of a golden scarab, a rare and sacred symbol in Egyptian mythology representing rebirth. As she described the dream in his office, a beetle tapped against the window. Jung opened it and caught the insect, a scarabaeid beetle, uncannily similar to the one in her dream and unheard of in that region. From a purely causal perspective, this was a random event, a freak accident of nature. But from the perspective of synchronicity, it was a moment of profound significance, the outer world mirroring the inner, not through cause and effect, but through meaning. The patient's psychological stagnation, her resistance to transformation, was being answered by the universe with a symbol of renewal. The scarab was not just a beetle, it was a message, a nudge from the deeper order of things. This is the essence of synchronicity. Events are linked not by chains of cause and effect, but by their shared meaning. Unlike causality, which operates in time, synchronicity operates in significance. It is as if the universe has a second hidden layer of connection, one that binds things not by physical laws, but by their symbolic resonance. This is why synchronicities often occur during periods of psychological intensity, during spiritual crises, profound decisions, or moments of inner transformation. The psyche, when activated, seems to bend the world around it, drawing in events that reflect its state. A man consumed by thoughts of betrayal may suddenly encounter stories of deceit everywhere, in books, in conversations, in news headlines. A woman contemplating love may find hearts in graffiti, in cloud formations, in the arrangement of leaves on a path. The rational mind dismisses these as selective attention, but the deeper mind recognizes them as part of a dialogue, the outer world responding to the inner in a language of symbols. The scientific mind recoils at this, for it violates the sacred dogma of objectivity, the belief that the observer and the observed are separate, that the mind does not influence what it perceives. Yet quantum physics has already eroded this illusion at the subatomic level, where the act of observation alters the behavior of particles. Jung's collaborator, physicist Wolfgang Pauli, saw in synchronicity a parallel principle, a hint that the division between mind and matter might be an illusion, a relic of outdated thinking. If an electron can behave as both particle and wave depending on how it is observed, why should we assume that larger events are immune to the influence of consciousness? This is not to suggest that the psyche controls external events like a puppeteer, but rather that there is a reciprocity between inner and outer, a dance of meaning that transcends linear cause and effect. Synchronicity also undermines the illusion of chance. We are taught that randomness governs all that cannot be explained by causality, that coincidences are just statistical noise, the inevitable byproduct of a vast and indifferent universe. But synchronicity proposes that what we call chance may instead be the visible trace of a deeper intelligence, one that operates through a causal connection. The Chinese concept of the Tao speaks to this, the idea that all things are part of an organic whole, moving in harmony even when the connections are not apparent. In this view, the scarab at Jung's window was not an accident, but an expression of a unified reality where psyche and world are two sides of the same coin. This has profound implications for how we live. If we accept that reality is not just a clockwork mechanism, but a living, responsive field of meaning, then our approach to decision-making, creativity, and even suffering must shift. Synchronicities often appear at crossroads, offering hints, nudging us toward paths that align with our deeper selves. Ignoring them is like ignoring road signs in a foreign country. We may still reach a destination, but it may not be where we needed to go. This is why Jung urged paying attention to dreams, to hunches, to those moments when the world seems to speak directly to us. They are not fantasies to be brushed aside. They are threads in the larger tapestry, clues to an order that operates beyond the visible. The modern world, with its obsession with control and predictability, resists this idea. We prefer algorithms to auguries, data to divination. But in doing so, we cut ourselves off from a deeper layer of intelligence, one that does not compute but knows, that does not analyze but recognizes. Synchronicity is the reminder that the universe is not a machine but a living mystery, and that our psyches are not isolated observers but participants in its unfolding. To dismiss this is to live half-blind, navigating only by the narrow beam of rationality, while the vast dark hums with meanings we refuse to see. The resistance to synchronicity is at its core a resistance to the idea that life has meaning beyond what we assign to it. It forces us to confront the possibility that we are part of something larger, that our choices ripple through dimensions we cannot measure, that the line between fate and free will is far more porous than we dare admit. This is uncomfortable, for it removes the safety net of materialism, the assurance that reality is solid, predictable, and indifferent. Synchronicity suggests instead that reality is responsive, that it answers to the depths within us, and that the stories we live are co-authored by forces both personal and transpersonal. To live with an awareness of synchronicity is to live with a foot in two worlds, the empirical and the numinous, the seen and the unseen. It is to recognize that the universe is not just a collection of objects, but a web of relationships, and that the psyche is not just a spectator, but a player in the grand drama of existence. This does not mean abandoning reason, but expanding it, allowing for the possibility that logic is not the only way of knowing, that some truths are written in symbols, and that the most important connections are those that cannot be measured, only felt. In the end, synchronicity is more than a curiosity. It is a crack in the wall of ordinary perception, a glimpse of a reality that is far stranger, far more alive than the one we are taught to believe in. It is the whisper that says the world is not just out there, it is also in here, and the two are speaking to each other in a language we are only beginning to understand. The human psyche is not a unified kingdom ruled by the conscious mind, but a fragmented realm where entire territories remain uncharted, unexplored, and often actively avoided. Among these hidden provinces, none exerts more influence over our lives than the shadow, the sum of all that we refuse to acknowledge about ourselves. This is not merely a collection of minor flaws or embarrassing memories, but a living, autonomous complex within the psyche that contains our repressed desires, our denied weaknesses, our buried traumas, and all aspects of our personality deemed incompatible with our self-image. The shadow does not disappear simply because we ignore it. It grows stronger in the darkness, manifesting in projections, compulsions, and self-sabotaging behaviors that seem to come from nowhere yet derail our best-laid plans. When we speak of hidden blocks in manifestation or the mysterious ways we undermine our own success, we are speaking of the shadow's invisible hand directing the play from backstage. Civilization demands repression. From childhood, we learn to disown certain impulses, anger, greed, lust, vulnerability, to maintain social harmony and personal dignity. But what happens to these banished parts of ourselves? They do not evaporate. They coalesce into an alternative personality that operates beneath the surface of awareness. A man who prides himself on kindness may find himself inexplicably cruel in moments of stress. A woman who identifies as morally upright may discover shocking prejudices leaking into her private thoughts. These are not character failures, but shadow eruptions, moments when the disowned self rebels against its exile. The more rigidly we cling to a specific identity, the more powerful the shadow becomes, for it must compensate for all that the ego refuses to incorporate. This is why spiritual bypassing, the attempt to transcend human darkness through sheer positive thinking, so often backfires. The unprocessed shadow does not dissolve in light. It waits patiently in the wings, gathering strength for its next appearance. The shadow's influence on manifestation is particularly insidious because it operates through hidden beliefs that contradict our conscious intentions. A person may affirm wealth while harboring a deep unconscious conviction that money corrupts. Another may seek love while secretly believing they are unworthy of it. These shadow beliefs are not abstract ideas, but living psychic entities with their own intelligence and willpower. They communicate through symptoms, procrastination, sudden fatigue, inexplicable moods that arise precisely when we attempt to move toward our stated goals. The language of the shadow is not words, but consequences. It does not argue, it manifests. Until these hidden blocks are brought into consciousness and reconciled, they function like reverse prayers, canceling out our conscious desires with equal and opposite force. Projection is the shadow's primary mechanism of expression. What we cannot acknowledge in ourselves, we perceive in others with exaggerated clarity. The man who denies his own aggression sees enemies everywhere. The woman who represses her sensuality becomes obsessed with the immodesty of others. This is not merely psychological error, but a survival tactic of the psyche, a way of externalizing inner conflict to protect the ego from disintegration. The problem arises when we mistake these projections for reality, constructing entire worldviews based on the shadow's distorted reflections. Relationships falter, opportunities are missed, and life seems perpetually stacked against us, not because the universe is hostile, but because we are unwittingly fighting ourselves through surrogate battles in the external world. Dreams provide the most direct access to the shadow, for in sleep, the censorship of the ego relaxes, allowing the unconscious to communicate in symbols. Recurring nightmares of being chased often represent the shadow's pursuit, the parts of ourselves we are running from finally gaining ground. Dreams of forgotten rooms in one's house symbolized neglected aspects of the psyche, suddenly demanding attention. Even pleasant dreams can carry shadow elements, as when we exhibit uncharacteristic bravery or creativity that our waking self would never permit. The shadow in dreams is rarely subtle. It appears as threatening figures, disapproving authorities, or even grotesque versions of ourselves. These images are not literal but compensatory. The psyche's attempt to restore balance by confronting the ego with what it has excluded. The process of shadow work is not for the faint of heart. It requires dismantling the persona, the carefully constructed mask we present to the world, and facing what we have spent a lifetime avoiding. This is not an intellectual exercise, but an embodied confrontation with our own darkness. The initial encounter often triggers intense resistance, shame, denial, even physical discomfort, as the ego fights to maintain its illusion of control. Yet the rewards are proportional to the difficulty, for every piece of shadow reclaimed becomes fuel for authentic power. The anger we integrate transforms into healthy boundaries. The greed we acknowledge matures into self-worth. The vulnerability we embrace deepens into genuine connection. What was once a block becomes a cornerstone of our wholeness. Cultural shadows add another layer of complexity. Just as individuals repress unacceptable traits, so do societies collectively tenetly aspects of their nature that contradict their self-image. The model minority suppresses rage at systemic injustice. The progressive community hides its own dogmatism behind rhetoric of tolerance. These collective shadows erupt in social unrest, political extremism, and cultural upheavals that seem to come out of nowhere yet follow the same psychological principles as personal shadow manifestations. When attempting to manifest change on a societal level, these hidden collective beliefs must be addressed with the same rigor as personal shadows, for they operate with the same compensatory force. The spiritual seeker faces unique shadow challenges, as the very pursuit of enlightenment can become a sophisticated avoidance mechanism. Spiritual bypassing, using transcendent beliefs to escape psychological work, creates some of the most resilient shadow material. The guru who preaches detachment but secretly craves admiration. The healer who advocates love but harbors judgment. These are not hypocrites, but individuals whose shadows have grown in direct proportion to their spiritual personas. The more we identify with light, the darker our shadow becomes, until it inevitably surfaces in ways that shatter the carefully maintained image. True integration requires surrendering the fantasy of perfection and embracing the messy, contradictory wholeness of being human. The relationship between shadow and manifestation is ultimately alchemical. Just as base metals were believed to contain latent gold, so do our shadows hold the raw materials of our unrealized potential. The traits we disown often contain our greatest strengths in distorted form. The control freak has leadership potential. The people pleaser possesses deep empathy. The rebel carries the seeds of innovation. Shadow work is not about elimination but transformation. Not about fighting darkness but restoring its rightful place in the ecology of the self. When we withdraw our projections, when we stop blaming external circumstances for our internal conflicts, we reclaim the energy previously spent on maintaining illusions. This energy then becomes available for conscious creation. The paradox of the shadow is that it is both our greatest obstacle and our most potent ally. Its resistance feels like sabotage, but functions as protection, preventing us from achieving goals that would destabilize our fragile self-concept until we are ready to handle the truth of who we are. The blocks are not arbitrary. They are the psyche's way of demanding authenticity before granting success. To manifest from ego is to invite shadow resistance. To manifest from wholeness is to harness the full spectrum of our being, light and dark, known and unknown, in service of a vision that honors all parts of ourselves. The path does not go around the shadow, but through it, not by conquering our darkness, but by finally recognizing it as the unclaimed half of our power. The human psyche is not a blank slate at birth, not merely a collection of personal experiences waiting to be inscribed upon the neutral ground of consciousness. Beneath the surface of individual memory lies something far older, far more universal, a subterranean ocean of ancestral wisdom, primordial patterns, and mythic echoes that shape our thoughts, our behaviors, and our very perception of reality before we ever become aware of their influence. This is the collective unconscious, Carl Jung's revolutionary concept that shattered the notion of the mind as an isolated phenomenon and revealed it instead as a living continuum stretching back through the entire evolution of human experience. The collective unconscious does not develop through personal experience. It is inherited as fundamental to our psychological structure as the instincts are to our biological functioning. It is the wellspring from which all myths, all religions, all great art and literature and dreams emerge, not as inventions of the creative mind, but as revelations of something that has always existed, waiting to be discovered anew in each generation. Within this vast, impersonal stratum of the psyche reside the archetypes, the universal, timeless patterns that govern human experience across cultures and epochs. These are not learned concepts, but innate predispositions, the psychological equivalents of biological instincts, the hero, the shadow, the wise old man, the great mother, the trickster. These are not mere metaphors, but living forces within the psyche, templates of meaning that organize how we perceive and interact with the world, long before our rational minds attempt to make sense of them. When a child instinctively fears the dark, it is not because of personal trauma, but because the thanks archetype, the universal symbol of the unknown, already lives within them. When someone falls in love, they are not merely responding to another individual, but projecting the anima, or animus archetype, the eternal feminine or masculine that dwells in the collective unconscious, onto a mortal canvas. The power of these archetypes lies precisely in their autonomy. They are not under our conscious control, but emerge spontaneously, shaping our emotions, our relationships, and our destinies with or without our consent. The archetypes manifest most visibly in our dreams, where the constraints of waking logic dissolve and the symbolic language of the unconscious takes center stage. A dream of being chased by a monster does not require childhood trauma to explain it. The shadow archetype, the embodiment of all we fear and reject, is birthright of every human psyche. A vision of a nurturing or devouring female figure does not necessarily stem from one's personal mother. The great mother archetype exists independently, coloring our perceptions of femininity, nature, and creation itself. These images are not personal but transpersonal, emerging from depths far beyond individual experience. This is why certain symbols, the snake, the mandala, the divine child, appear in nearly identical forms across cultures, separated by geography and millennia. They are not transmitted but arise anew from the same collective source, like different flowers growing from the same hidden root system. Mythology provides the clearest window into the archetypes in action, for myths are not primitive attempts at science, but the collective unconscious expressing itself through narrative. The hero's journey, found in everything from ancient epics to modern blockbusters, is not a story humans invented, but a story that invented humans, a pattern so deeply ingrained in our psyche that we cannot help but recreate it in our art and even in our lives. The hero who ventures into the unknown, faces trials, defeats some manifestation of darkness, and returns transformed is not just a plot device, but an archetypal blueprint that continues to shape our understanding of growth, initiation, and self-realization. When we resonate with these stories, it is not because they are unfamiliar, but because they are too familiar, echoes of something we already know at the deepest level of our being, remembered rather than learned. Religion, too, is incomprehensible without the archetypal lens. The gods and goddesses of every pantheon are not arbitrary inventions, but personifications of archetypal forces. Zeus as the father, Athena as the wise virgin, Kali as the destroyer. The power of religious symbols lies not in their historical accuracy, but in their ability to tap into these universal patterns, providing containers for experiences too vast for ordinary language. When a Christian kneels before the cross or a Hindu meditates on the image of Shiva, they are not merely following tradition, but engaging with archetypes that predate and will outlast any particular creed. This is why religious imagery undergoes such little fundamental change over centuries, why the Buddha and Christ share striking symbolic similarities despite emerging from different cultures. The archetypes shape the forms that spiritual realization takes, not the other way around. Even in our supposedly secular age, the archetypes continue to operate with undiminished force, merely adopting new guises. Celebrities become our gods and goddesses, politicians our tribal chiefs, brands our totems. The same psychic energy that once built cathedrals now fuels fan conventions and viral trends, for the collective unconscious does not evolve at the same pace as technology. The internet did not create our need for connection and meaning. It provided a new arena for ancient archetypal dramas to play out, the same quests for identity, belonging, and transcendence now conducted through digital avatars rather than village rituals. The medium changes, the underlying patterns remain. The therapeutic value of recognizing archetypes lies in their power to depersonalize psychological suffering. What feels like a uniquely personal crisis, the midlife despair, the creative block, the romantic obsession, often reveals itself as an archetypal initiation when viewed through this lens. The man who suddenly abandons his career to pursue art is not having a breakdown, but being overtaken by the archetype of rebirth. The woman who becomes inexplicably drawn to her ancestral roots is not being nostalgic, but answering the call of the mother archetype. Understanding this does not eliminate the pain of transformation, but it does provide a context larger than the individual ego, a sense of participating in something timeless, rather than being victimized by random misfortune. The archetypes grant meaning to suffering by framing it as initiation rather than punishment. Yet the archetypes are not benign guides, but immoral forces, as capable of destruction as they are of creation. When unrecognized, they possess us completely, turning individuals into puppets of unconscious compulsions. The political fanatic is possessed by the shadow archetype, the cult leader by the wise old man, the starlet by the eternal child, not metaphorically but literally, in the psychological sense. The history of mass movements, wars, and social hysterias is largely the history of archetypes running rampant through groups of people who mistake these impersonal forces for personal conviction. Individuation, Jung's term for psychological maturity, does not mean escaping the archetypes, but developing a relationship with them, learning to engage their energy without being engulfed by it. Science itself is not immune to archetypal influence, for the collective unconscious shapes even our attempts to tranto it. The mad scientist is not just a cultural trope, but the embodiment of the magician archetype gone awry, the relentless quest for knowledge untempered by wisdom. The artificial intelligence we strive to create often mirrors the divine child archetype, a technological savior destined to surpass its creators. Our very conception of the universe, from the Big Bang to the multiverse theory, bears the unmistakable imprint of archetypal thinking, the eternal patterns reasserting themselves even in our most objective endeavors. The collective unconscious is not located in any physical space, yet it is as real as gravity in its effects. We swim in it like fish in water, unaware of the medium that shapes every movement until some archetypal current seizes us and carries us into depths we never intended to explore. To become conscious of these forces is not to master them. The archetypes will always be larger than any individual, but to navigate them with some degree of intention, to recognize when we are living a myth rather than merely living. The alternative is to remain unconscious actors in an ancient play, mistaking our assigned roles for free will, never realizing that the most personal aspects of our lives are also the most universal, that what feels like our private story has been told 1,000 times before in 1,000 different tongues, and will be told again long after we are gone. The archetypes are the true dramatis personae of human existence. We are but their temporary vessels, granted the fleeting privilege of giving them form before returning them to the collective sea from which they came. Thanks for watching.